The ceiling was white. Too white. A blinding, sterile, horrifyingly bright white that hurt to look at. Hermione blinked against the harsh light. The smell hit her next. It wasn't the dust and ozone of the Department of Mysteries. It was sterile potion smoke, crisp clean linen, and the faint, coppery tang of blood-replenishing potion. Saint Mungo's. Her head pounded in a steady, vicious rhythm. The last thing she remembered was the prophecy orb shattering. The falling shelves in the Hall of Prophecy. Sirius shouting. The flash of a purple curse aimed directly at her chest by Antonin Dolohov. She tried to sit up. Her muscles felt incredibly heavy, like she had been swimming through molasses. Wrong. Everything felt completely wrong. She forced her eyes open wider. The room came into focus. A private recovery ward. 2 beds. Heavy stone walls. A single, arched window showing a sliver of grey sky. And a voice. If you're going to thrash about like a captured blast-ended scroot, Granger, at least have the decency to do it quietly. Some of us are trying to endure this miserable existence in peace. The voice was a drawl. Cold. Sharp. Incredibly familiar. Hermione turned her head so fast her neck popped. Draco Malfoy was sitting in the bed next to hers. He looked terrible. His skin was a translucent, sickly grey. His cheekbones were too sharp, casting hollow shadows on his face. His white blonde hair was a messy, unkempt disaster, completely devoid of its usual pristine gel. He wore a standard, hideous hospital gown. There were dark, bruised circles under his eyes that made him look like he hadn't slept in a month. She frowned. Her brain struggled to keep up. Malfoy? Her voice was a dry rasp. She swallowed hard, trying to generate some moisture. What are you doing here? He glared at her. It was a proper, withering Malfoy glare, full of aristocratic disdain. But it looked exhausted. I was about to ask you the same exact thing, he said. He shifted against his pillows with a wince. Since when do they put up standing, pure-blood Slytherins in the same recovery ward as Gryffindor nuisances? Did you get hit with a hex too? She pushed herself up on her elbows. The effort made her arms shake. In the Department of Mysteries? Is that why you're here? Malfoy studied her. His pale eyes narrowed to slits. The Department of Mysteries? He sounded genuinely confused. He tilted his head. Granger, did that oversized brain of yours finally short-circuit? That was 2 years ago. Hermione froze. The air in the room suddenly felt entirely too thin. Don't be ridiculous, she said. Her voice shook. The pitch was too high. It was yesterday. We were in the ministry. The inquisitorial squad caught us in Umbridge's office, and then we flew to London on the Thestrals 2 years ago. He repeated. His voice was flat. Hard. But his hands were gripping the edges of his thin blanket so hard his knuckles were entirely white. The Dark Lord is dead, Granger. The war is over. She couldn't breathe. 2 years? That was impossible. It couldn't be true. She would know. She would remember. She wouldn't just lose 2 entire years of her life. Of the war. Of Voldemort's return. You're lying, she snapped. Panic, hot and fast, began to claw at her throat. You're playing a trick. This is one of your stupid, twisted little games. Where is Harry? Where is Ron? Hopefully dead, Malfoy said automatically. It was a fifth-year insult. A reflex. But it lacked any real heat. It sounded hollow. Tired. Like he didn't even mean it. He rubbed his temples with long, elegant fingers. I don't know what happened. I remember the astronomy tower. Dumbledore. The task. And then, nothing. Just waking up in this pathetic excuse for a ward with a headache that feels like a bludger to the skull. And you. Hermione's chest tightened. She looked down at her own hands. They didn't look like her hands. The hands she remembered from yesterday were soft. Unblemished, except for the faint quill calluses on her right index finger. These hands were completely different. There was a thin, jagged white scar across her knuckles. Heavy calluses on her fingertips, the kind earned from holding a wand in a death grip for months on end. A small, circular burn mark near her thumb. And there, stark against the back of her left hand, a faint, silvery scar that spelled out a word she couldn't quite read. This wasn't a trick. She threw the blankets off. The sudden movement made her head swim, but she didn't care. She needed to find Harry. She needed a calendar. She needed to see the Daily Prophet. She needed to know exactly what had happened. Her bare feet hit the cold stone floor. Her legs gave out instantly. Her muscles felt like they had turned to water. She didn't hit the ground. Strong hands gripped her elbows. Warm hands. They held her upright before her knees even brushed the stone. She gasped. Malfoy was standing right in front of her. He was holding her up. He looked just as shocked as she did. His grip was completely secure. It wasn't the tentative, clumsy grab of an enemy trying to prevent a Lorciat. It was the firm, practiced hold of someone who had caught her 100 times before. His thumbs rested perfectly in the hollows of her elbows. He smelled like mint, old parchment, and a very specific, sharp scent of crackling magic. It was the most comforting smell she had ever encountered in her entire life. Why did Draco Malfoy smell like comfort? His gaze locked on her. His eyes were wide. Panic flickered in his grey irises, warring with something much deeper. He started. He swallowed hard. The Adam's apple in his throat bobbed. I don't. He let go of her abruptly. He stepped back. Fast. Like she had burned him. Hermione swayed, catching herself on the edge of the mattress. She found her eyes glued to him. Why did you do that? She whispered. Malfoy crossed his arms tightly over his chest. He looked terrified. Reflex. I didn't want you cracking your enormous head open and bleeding all over my floor space. I refused to share a room with a corpse. It was a lie. The words were sharp, standard issue Malfoy cruelty, but his voice was shaking. He retreated to his own bed, sitting heavily on the mattress. He dragged a shaking hand through his blonde hair, messing it up even further. He wouldn't look at her. Hermione slowly pulled her legs back onto the bed. She pulled the blankets up to her chin. She was trembling. Not from the cold, but from the terrifying realization that her body knew things her mind didn't. The heavy wooden door banged open. A healer rushed in, carrying a metal tray laden with clinking potion vials. She was young, frazzled, and looking over her shoulder. The edge of the tray clipped the door frame. The tray slipped from her grasp and hit the stone floor with a deafening crash. Glass shattered. Potions hissed and smoked as they mixed on the stones. Hermione jumped. She didn't even have time to scream. A blur of white hospital gown and pale skin crossed the space between their beds. It happened faster than thought. Before the glass even settled on the floor, Malfoy was there. He ignored the healer. He ignored the door. He ignored the smoking potions. He was standing squarely in front of Hermione's bed. His right arm was thrown out, shielding her body from the blast radius. His left hand was hovering near his hip, exactly where a wand holster would be. His chest he heaved. Silence stretched in the room, broken only by the fizzing of the spilled potions. The healer stood frozen, her mouth open in shock. Malfoy slowly lowered his arm. He looked down at his empty hand. Then he looked back at Hermione. His expression was completely blank, wiped clean of any snark or anger. "What?" he whispered, his voice cracking on the single syllable. "Am I doing?" He backed away. He took 3 long strides back to his side of the room. He looked as if he might crawl out of his own skin. He sank onto his bed and buried his face in his hands. "Sorry," the healer gasped, pulling out her wand to vanish the mess. "I am so sorry. I didn't mean to startle you. The wards on this room, your magic is still highly volatile. Any sudden noise triggers a combat response." Hermione couldn't look away from the spot where Malfoy had just been standing. Why had he moved? Why did he move to protect her? Twice. He was Draco Malfoy. He hated her. He called her names. He wished her dead. And yet, his body had prioritized her safety over his own. Without thinking. "Healer," Hermione said. Her voice sounded very small. Very lost. "What happened to us?" The healer sighed. She vanished the last of the glass and walked over, looking between the two of them with a pitying expression. It was the worst kind of look. It was the look you gave to tragic, broken things. A memory curse. The healer said gently. It rebounded during the final duel in the Great Hall. It hit both of you simultaneously. It wiped the last 2 years completely clean. Malfoy scoffed from behind his hands. He dropped them and glared at the healer. He crossed his arms tighter, making himself look smaller. "And why, exactly, am I sharing a room with her?" he demanded. "Put me in the Slytherin ward. Or Azkaban. Wherever I belong now. I assume my father is already there." The healer shook her head. "We can't separate you." "Why not?" Malfoy's voice was rising. The panic was bleeding through the anger. "I'm a Death Eater. I have the mark. She's Potter's golden girl. This is a security risk. It's a medical hazard. It's a medical necessity." The healer said firmly, her voice brokering no argument. "Because of the scars." Malfoy frowned. "What scars?" The healer pointed her wand at Malfoy's left forearm. Not the outer forearm where the dark mark rested in ugly, faded ink. The inner forearm. "Pull up your sleeve, Mr. Malfoy." He hesitated. He looked at Hermione, an unspoken question in his grey eyes. Then he yanked the thin fabric up. Right over his pulse point, there was a jagged, silver scar. It looked like a severe spell burn. But it wasn't just a scar. It shimmered faintly with an ethereal, pulsing magic. Now you, Miss Granger. Your collarbone. Hermione reached up with shaking fingers. She pulled the cotton collar of her gown to the side. Right over her heart, matching the shape exactly, was the same silver, shimmering burn. It pulsed with the exact same rhythm as the one on Malfoy's wrist. Malfoy stopped breathing. Hermione couldn't form words. The silence in the room was deafening. Blood magic. The healer said quietly. A protective bind. It only forms when two people willingly cast it on each other to keep the other alive. It requires a profound, anchoring connection. It ties your magical cores together permanently. The room spun. The white walls seemed to close in. No. Malfoy said. His voice cracked completely. No. That's impossible. If we move you to different wings, your magical cores will destabilize. The healer explained. Her voice was sympathetic, but clinically detached. You would both go into magical shock within hours. You have to stay in proximity until the bond settles and your cores stabilize. Hermione looked at the shimmering scar on her chest. Blood magic. Highly illegal. Extremely dangerous. And requiring absolute, unconditional trust. The kind of trust that meant offering your life for someone else's. With Draco Malfoy. The boy who had called her mudblood. The boy who had laughed when she was cursed. The boy who was now sitting across from her, looking like his entire world had just caved in. She looked up at him. His eyes were fixed on her face. The coldness was gone from him entirely. The aristocratic mask had shattered. It was replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. His hand twitched on his knee. The fingers curled slightly, like he wanted to reach across the space between the beds. Like he needed to anchor himself to her. He forced his hand down into his lap. He clenched it into a tight fist until the knuckles turned white. Granger, he said. His voice was a ragged rasp. What did we do? Hermione shook her head. She didn't know. Her brilliant, encyclopedic brain was completely empty. But her body knew. Her skin felt too cold now that he wasn't standing next to her. Her heart, beating rapidly against her ribs just moments ago, was now settling into a steady, calm rhythm that only made sense when she looked directly at him. Her magic felt settled, quiet, safe, only because he was within 10 feet of her. They hated each other. That was the only fact she had left in her arsenal. It was the only thing that made sense. But as she watched Malfoy subconsciously shift his weight on the mattress so he was perfectly positioned between her and the closed door silent, vigilant guard, she knew one thing for certain. Whatever they had been doing for the last 2 years, it definitely wasn't hating each other. The silence in the recovery ward was deafening. It had been 4 hours since the healer left. 4 hours of Hermione sitting completely rigid on her mattress, her knees pulled to her chest, trying to process the impossible. 4 hours of Malfoy pacing the length of the room like a caged panther, never once crossing the invisible midway line between their beds. He was exhausting to watch. He moved with a restless, coiled energy that made her own muscles ache in sympathy. But every time he turned to the far wall, his eyes flicked to her. A quick, involuntary check. Ensuring she was still there. Ensuring she was safe. She hated it. She hated that it made her chest feel warm instead of terrified. The heavy wooden door finally opened again. Hermione flinched. Malfoy stopped pacing instantly. He squared his shoulders, his hand twitching toward the empty space where his wand should be, inserting himself between Hermione and the entrance. Two people stepped into the room. Harry Potter looked exactly the same, but entirely different. He was taller, broader across the shoulders. He looked older than 18. He wore an Auror's combat coat, singed at the edges. Beside him stood Theodore Nott. Nott wore impeccably tailored dark robes and a deeply amused smirk that didn't quite reach his exhausted eyes. "Harry," Hermione breathed. Harry's face cracked into a massive, relieved smile. He crossed the room in 3 strides, completely ignoring Malfoy, and pulled Hermione into a bone-crushing hug. "Thank Merlin," Harry said, his voice muffled against her hair. "The healers said you were awake, but they said you didn't remember." Hermione squeezed him back, burying her face in his shoulder. He smelled like ash and victory. "I don't. Harry, I don't remember anything after the Department of Mysteries." Harry pulled back. His green eyes were sympathetic. "I know. It's brilliant that you're alive, though. We thought he swallowed hard. We thought we lost you both." "Both," Malfoy repeated. His voice was laced with pure venom. Harry turned. He looked at Malfoy. There was no hatred in Harry's eyes. No suspicion. Just a tired, deeply familiar sort of camaraderie that made Hermione's head spin. "All right, Malfoy?" Harry asked casually, as if he were asking Ron. Malfoy sneered. He crossed his arms defensively. "Do I look all right, Potter? I'm trapped in a hospital room with your insufferable sidekick, missing 2 years of my life, and apparently missing my dark mark as well." Nott leaned against the door frame. He chuckled. It was a dark, rich sound. "Oh, this is going to be incredibly entertaining," Nott drawled. His back to his factory settings. Malfoy shot him a murderous glare. "Shut up, Theo. Explain to me what I'm doing here, before I lose what's left of my mind." Harry sighed. He ran a hand through his messy hair. He looked between the two of them. "Right. Well, short version," Harry said, leaning against the footboard of Hermione's bed. "You're a spy, Malfoy. You defected to the Order at the beginning of our 6th year. You've been feeding us intelligence for 2 years. You're the reason we won." The words dropped like lead weights onto the stone floor. Malfoy didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched Harry like Harry had grown a second head. "I'm a what?" Malfoy said flatly. "A spy." Harry repeated. "A bloody good one, actually. Saved my life twice. Saved Hermione's 3 times. That is a lie." Hermione blurted out. She couldn't stop herself. Logic demanded she reject the premise. He's a coward. He only cares about himself. Why on earth would he defect? Nott let out a loud, entirely unsympathetic bark of laughter. "A coward," Nott wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. "Oh, Granger. If only you could hear yourself." Malfoy looked sick. He looked down at his left forearm, where the faded, grey shadow of the dark mark sat above the new, shimmering silver burn. "I defected," Malfoy said softly. Against my family. Against the Dark Lord. Yeah, Harry said. You did. Why? Malfoy demanded. He looked up, his grey eyes blazing with sudden, desperate anger. Why would I do that? It's suicide. Harry looked incredibly uncomfortable. He scratched the back of his neck and looked at the floor. Then he looked at Hermione. Then he looked at Not. Don't look at me. Not said cheerfully. I am not spoiling the ending of this tragic romance. They need to figure it out for themselves. It builds character. What romance? Hermione snapped. Her heart started to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The healer said you have the scars. Harry said quietly, avoiding her question. The blood magic. Hermione reached up, her hand hovering protectively over her collarbone. Malfoy's hand mirrored the movement, covering his wrist. It's illegal, Hermione said automatically. It kept you alive, Harry countered softly. Dolohov hit you with a curse that should have killed you instantly. But because of the bond. Malfoy's magic absorbed half the impact. It's the only reason either of you are breathing. Hermione couldn't breathe now. She looked at Malfoy. Malfoy was looking out the window, his jaw clenched so tight the muscle jumped in his cheek. He looked completely shattered. We need you two to stay here. Harry continued. Just for a few days. The healers have set up a private suite attached to this ward. It has a sitting room and a small kitchen. You can't leave each other's proximity until the magic stabilizes, or you'll go into shock. I am not sharing a suite with her, Malfoy ground out without turning around. You literally don't have a choice, mate, Harry said. Hermione blinked at Harry. Mate. Harry Potter had just called Draco Malfoy mate. The press is having a field day. Not added lazily. The Golden Girl and the reformed Death Eater, tragically struck down by amnesia. It's the front page of the Prophet. It's disgusting. Get out, Malfoy whispered. Draco Not started. Get out. Malfoy roared, whipping around. His eyes were wild. Both of you. Get out of this room right now. Harry nodded slowly. He didn't look offended. He looked entirely used to Malfoy's temper. We'll come back tomorrow, Harry said to Hermione. He squeezed her shoulder. It's going to be okay, Hermione. I promise. Just try not to hex him. He's actually quite fond of you. Hermione's stomach plummeted. Harry and Not left, the heavy door clicking shut behind them. The silence returned, heavier and thicker than before. Hermione pulled her knees tighter to her chest. She rested her chin on them, feeling the cool cotton of her gown. Malfoy stood in the center of the room. He was breathing hard. A spy, he whispered to the empty air. It makes no logical sense. Hermione said. Her voice was small in the large room. There's no strategic advantage. The Order was losing. Voldemort had the Ministry. Defecting in 6th year was tactical suicide. Malfoy turned his head to look at her. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, hollow exhaustion. You think I don't know that, Granger? He said softly. He walked over to the door at the back of the ward, the one Harry had said led to the private suite. He opened it. I'm taking the couch. Malfoy said over his shoulder. If you need anything, call a healer. Don't call me." He stepped through the door and shut it firmly behind him. Hermione sat in the bed for another hour, trying to rebuild the foundation of her entire reality. It didn't work. The facts simply didn't fit the mold she had built for them. Eventually, the cold of the stone room seeped into her bones. Her magic felt unsettled, restless, humming just beneath her skin in a way that made her anxious. She swung her legs out of bed. She grabbed a thick woolen blanket folded at the foot of the mattress and wrapped it around her shoulders. She walked slowly to the suite door and pushed it open. It was a small, cozy room. There was a fireplace crackling warmly, a small kitchenette, and a large, plush velvet couch. Malfoy was lying on the couch. He was on his back, one arm thrown over his eyes to block out the firelight. He looked deeply uncomfortable, his long legs hanging slightly off the edge. Hermione stood in the doorway. The moment she stepped into the room, the restless humming beneath her skin quieted. Her magic settled into a low, comfortable purr. It was the proximity. The blood magic demanding they be near each other. She walked over to the armchair by the fire. It was a good 10 feet away from the couch. Safe distance. She sat down, pulling her knees up and wrapping the blanket tightly around herself. "I told you not to bother me," Malfoy said. His voice was muffled by his arm. "I'm not bothering you," Hermione replied primly. "I'm sitting by the fire. My room was cold." Then cast a warming charm. "I don't have my wand, Malfoy." He sighed heavily. "Right. Obviously." Silence fell over the room again. It wasn't the hostile silence of the recovery ward. The crackling fire made it softer. Hermione watched the flames dance. She tried to think about the war. She tried to think about Voldemort. But her traitorous brain kept looping back to the silver scar on her chest and the matching one on his wrist. Did it hurt? She asked quietly. Malfoy didn't move his arm. Did what hurt? Casting it. The blood magic. He was quiet for a very long time. "I don't know. I don't remember. It requires a knife," Hermione said, her encyclopedic knowledge bubbling up involuntarily. "You have to carve the rune into the other person's skin while they cast the incantation. It's supposed to be agonizing." Malfoy finally moved his arm. He turned his head to look at her. The firelight caught the sharp angles of his face, softening them into something almost beautiful. "Why are you telling me this, Granger?" "Because it means we let each other do it," she said. Her voice trembled slightly. "It means I sat there and let you cut into me. And you let me cut into you. Willingly." Malfoy's eyes darkened. He looked away, his gaze fixed on the fire. "We must have been out of our minds," he murmured. "Desperate," Hermione corrected. "We must have been desperate." "Same thing." He shifted on the couch, turning onto his side so his back was to her. It was a clear dismissal. Hermione leaned her head back against the armchair. She was so tired. The exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing down on her eyelids. She closed her eyes. Just for a minute. When she woke up, the fire had burned down to glowing embers. The room was significantly colder. But Hermione wasn't cold at all. She was incredibly, overwhelmingly warm. She felt completely safe, enveloped in a scent of mint and old magic. She shifted slightly, her cheek resting against something solid that rose and fell in a steady rhythm. When she finally opened her eyes, she realized she was no longer in the armchair. She was on the velvet couch. Malfoy was lying flat on his back. Hermione was curled tightly against his side, her head resting on his chest, right over his heart. One of her arms was thrown across his stomach. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Malfoy's arm was wrapped securely around her waist, holding her flush against him. His chin was resting on the top of her messy curls. They were tangled together like a knot. Hermione froze. Her brain screamed at her to jump up, to slap him, to run back to the armchair. But her body refused to move. Her body felt exactly where it belonged. Her magic was purring in absolute contentment, wrapping around the two of them like a physical blanket. She could hear his heartbeat in her ear. It was slow and calm. He was still asleep. She tried to slowly, carefully, pull her arm back. The moment she shifted, Malfoy's arm tightened around her waist. It was an entirely subconscious, reflexive movement. He pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. "Stop moving, Granger," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. He didn't sound angry. He sounded exactly like a man who was used to waking up with her in his arms. Hermione stopped breathing. She didn't move. She couldn't. She just lay there in the dark, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his chest, terrifyingly aware that she didn't want to be anywhere else. The table was entirely covered in parchment. Harry had brought the files an hour ago, looking highly skeptical but entirely incapable of saying no to Hermione when she used her "I am not asking, I am demanding" tone. There were daily prophet clippings. Order of the Phoenix After Action reports. St. Mungo's intake forms. Everything related to the last 2 years of the war. Hermione sat at the small wooden table in the corner of their suite, her wild curls tied up in a messy knot, a quill gripped so tightly in her hand that her knuckles were white. She was reading a report from a skirmish in a Welsh forest 12 months ago. Order members Granger and Weasley were ambushed by a sect of snatchers. Extraction point was compromised. Unidentified Order operative, codename Silver, intervened, casting a highly localized disillusionment charm and diverting the snatchers to the northern ridge. Silver. She looked across the room. Malfoy was sitting in the armchair by the fire. He was wearing clean clothes. Someone, likely not, had dropped off a set of soft black trousers and a charcoal grey jumper. It made him look less like a ghost and more like the sharp, dangerous boy she remembered from Hogwarts. He was reading a book. He hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. His grey eyes flicked over the top of the book, landing on her for the 5th time in 5 minutes. "If you glare at that parchment any harder, Granger, it's going to catch fire." He drawled. His voice was smooth, bored. A perfect deflection. "I'm not glaring." Hermione snapped, dipping her quill entirely too aggressively into the inkwell. Ink splattered across the table, dotting her knuckles. "I am assimilating data." "You are having a quiet mental breakdown over a stack of bureaucratic drivel," Malfoy corrected. He snapped his book shut and tossed it onto the small side table. "It's exhausting to watch. My head hurts just looking at you. Then don't look at me. I am legally bound to share a room with you until my magic stops trying to tether itself to yours," Malfoy said. He leaned back in the chair, crossing his long legs. "Looking at you is an unavoidable occupational hazard." Hermione ground her teeth together. She looked back at the report. Codename: Silver. You were Silver, she said. It wasn't a question. Malfoy's expression hardened. I was a lot of things. Most of them highly unpleasant. You saved my life, she said, tapping the parchment. In Wales. And again in London, during the safe house raid. According to this, you apparate directly into a collapsing building to pull me out. Clearly, I suffered a severe lapse in judgment, Malfoy said flatly. Why did you do it? Hermione demanded. She dropped the quill. It rolled across the table, smearing wet ink over a Daily Prophet headline. Why would you risk your cover for me? Malfoy didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, his expression carefully blank. The mask was back in place. The panicked boy from the hospital bed yesterday was gone, replaced by the cool, calculated Slytherin. But his hands gave him away. His fingers were gripping the arms of the chair tightly enough to turn the knuckles white. I have absolutely no idea, Granger, he said softly. As we established yesterday, I don't remember. But it doesn't make any logical sense. Hermione threw her hands up in frustration. You hated me. We hated each other. You believed in blood purity. You called me a mudblood for 5 years. What could possibly happen in 2 years to make you defect from your family, betray Voldemort, and repeatedly risk your life for Muggleborn? Malfoy flinched. The word mudblood hung in the air between them, ugly and sharp. He stood up. He moved with a sudden, coiled grace that made Hermione's breath catch in her throat. I don't know, Malfoy said. His voice dropped an octave, losing the bored drawl entirely. I don't know why I did it. I don't know why I defected. I don't know why I let you carve a blood magic rune into my chest. He took 3 steps toward her. The distance between them vanished too quickly. And I don't know. He continued, stopping right in front of her table. Why the only time I've managed to sleep in the last 48 hours was when you were lying on top of me. The air left Hermione's lungs. She looked up at him. He was standing so close she could feel the heat radiating off his skin. She could smell the mint and the magic. Her own magic, which had been frantic and anxious all morning, immediately settled into a calm, steady hum at his proximity. The memory of waking up tangled in his arms on the couch rushed back, hot and vivid. The way his arm had tightened around her waist. The way he had told her to stop moving. Hermione swallowed hard. Her throat was painfully dry. That was an accident, she whispered. Was it? Malfoy asked softly. He leaned down, placing both hands flat on the table, trapping her in the chair. His face was only inches from hers. Because when you tried to pull away, my arm didn't seem to think it was an accident. It seemed to think you belonged exactly where you were. Hermione's heart hammered against her ribs. The logic she had been trying to build all morning was completely crumbling. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. They were completely covered in black ink, smeared across her knuckles and staining her fingernails. I can't logic my way out of this, she whispered, her voice cracking. The exhaustion she had been holding back finally broke through. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. There's a massive gap in my head, and none of this makes any sense, and my hands won't stop shaking. Malfoy looked down at her hands. The sharp, dangerous energy suddenly drained out of him. He slowly pushed off the table. Stand up, Granger, he said quietly. Hermione blinked back the tears. What? Stand up. She didn't have the energy to argue. She pushed her chair back and stood. Her legs felt incredibly weak. Malfoy didn't say anything else. He reached out and gently wrapped his fingers around her wrist. The physical contact sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated warmth straight to her chest. It was like drinking a perfect cup of tea after standing in a freezing rainstorm. It was safety. He led her away from the table, toward the small kitchenette in the corner of the suite. He turned on the brass tap. The water ran warm. Malfoy reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean white handkerchief. He held her wrist with his left hand, keeping her hand over the basin. With his right hand, he ran the handkerchief under the water. "You're making a mess of yourself," he murmured. He began to wash the ink off her hands. Hermione couldn't breathe. The suite was entirely silent except for the sound of running water. Malfoy's touch was incredibly gentle. He rubbed the damp cloth over her knuckles, carefully wiping away the black stains. He traced the lines of her palm, his thumb brushing against her skin with a reverence that made her heart physically ache. He washed the thin white scar on her knuckles. He washed the calluses on her fingertips. He was treating her hands like they were something precious. Like they were the most important thing in the world to him. Hermione watched his face. His eyelashes cast long shadows on his sharp cheekbones. His expression was completely focused, perfectly serious. The hostility was gone. The sarcasm was gone. There was only this quiet, devastating tenderness. "Draco," she whispered. It was the first time she had used his first name since waking up. Malfoy's hand stopped. He went completely still, the wet handkerchief hovering over her fingers. He slowly lifted his head. His grey eyes locked onto hers. The space between them was suddenly charged with something heavy and electric. It pulled at her, a physical gravity that demanded she close the remaining distance. He stepped closer. The toes of his shoes brushed against hers. He dropped the handkerchief into the sink. He reached up, his wet fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. Hermione's breath hitched. She leaned into his touch instinctively. Her body knew exactly what to do. Her body knew the exact pressure of his hand, the exact angle of his jaw, the exact way he looked right before he leaned down. His eyes flicked to her lips. The gravity was overwhelming. It was the easiest thing in the world to just let it happen. To let the muscle memory take over. His face was an inch away. She could feel his breath on her skin. She closed her eyes. "I don't remember." The thought slammed into her brain like a physical blow. She didn't remember. She didn't remember the first time he kissed her. She didn't remember the conversations that led to this. She didn't remember the battles, the fear, the blood magic. She didn't know the man standing in front of her. She only knew the boy who had hated her. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. Hermione jerked back. She pulled her hand out of his grip and stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the kitchen counter. Malfoy froze. His hand hung in the empty space where her face had just been. Hermione faced him, her chest heaving. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't do this." Malfoy slowly lowered his hand. The tenderness was instantly wiped from his face, replaced by a cold, impenetrable mask. "I don't know you," Hermione whispered, her voice breaking. My body thinks it knows you, but my mind doesn't. You're a stranger. We're strangers. The words hit him visibly. He actually took a step back, as if she had cast a physical spell. His jaw tightened. The muscle ticked in his cheek. Right. Malfoy said. His voice was completely devoid of emotion. It was ice. Of course, Granger. How utterly illogical of me. He turned around. He walked out of the kitchenette, crossed the sitting room, and walked straight back into the main recovery ward, shutting the heavy wooden door firmly behind him. Hermione stood alone in the quiet suite. Her hands were clean, but she felt entirely, completely shattered. The silence in the room was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, charged, and utterly heartbreaking. The darkness was suffocating. Hermione was running down a corridor that had no end. The stone walls were collapsing around her, sending plumes of thick, choking dust into the air. Crucio. The word echoed off the stones, amplified 1,000 times. She turned a corner and suddenly it wasn't the Department of Mysteries anymore. It was the Great Hall. The enchanted ceiling was fractured, raining down shards of black glass. There was a flash of purple light. It illuminated the face of Antonin Dolohov, his wand pointed directly at her chest. She tried to raise her wand. She tried to cast a shield charm. But her arm wouldn't move. It was pinned to her side. The purple curse hit her dead center. The pain wasn't just heat. It was a cold, absolute tearing sensation, ripping the magic right out of her veins. And then there was a scream. It took her a long time to realize the scream was tearing out of her own throat. Hermione woke up. She was thrashing against the sheets, her fingernails clawing at the thick cotton as if trying to dig herself out of a grave. The air in the bedroom was entirely too thin. She couldn't draw a breath. Harry! She choked out, her voice a desperate, ragged sob. Harry! Her chest burned. The scar over her heart was pulsing with a searing, agonizing heat. Granger! The voice came from the darkness. It wasn't Harry. No, 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 Hermione sobbed, curling into a tight ball on the mattress. The darkness of the room felt exactly like the darkness of the corridor. The dust was still in her lungs. She couldn't breathe. She was dying. The curse had hit her and she was dying. Granger. Hermione. The mattress dipped. Before her panicked mind could process the movement, strong hands gripped her shoulders. She flinched violently, expecting a curse, expecting a Death Eater. But the hands didn't strike. They pulled. They hauled her upright, out of the tangle of suffocating sheets, and pulled her flush against a solid, warm chest. Breathe, a voice ordered. It was close to her ear. A low, desperate rasp. You have to breathe. She couldn't. The panic was a physical weight crushing her ribs. She was gasping for air, her hands curling into fists against the soft fabric of his shirt. The arms around her tightened. One hand spread wide across her back, pressing firmly between her shoulder blades. The other hand came up to cup the back of her head, pressing her face securely into the crook of his neck. He didn't say anything else. Instead, a low, resonant sound started to vibrate in his chest. He was humming. It wasn't a lullaby. It was a strange, minor key melody, something old and classical, the kind of tune played on a lone cello in an empty room. The vibration traveled directly from his chest into hers. Instantly, the searing pain in her collarbone began to recede. The shimmering silver scar on her chest answered the scar on his wrist, the two magical signatures locking together like puzzle pieces. The scent of mint, old parchment, and crackling magic enveloped her entirely. Hermione stopped thrashing. She took a ragged, desperate breath. It filled her lungs with his scent. "That's it." Malfoy murmured, the words rumbling against her ear, interrupting the melody for just a second. "Just keep breathing." He went right back to humming, making no attempt to pull away or offer his usual sarcastic commentary. He simply held her, rocking her slightly side to side in a steady rhythm that felt so deeply familiar it made her heart ache. Hermione's hands slowly uncurled from their fists. She flattened her palms against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering against her hands, a frantic rhythm that completely contradicted his calm, steady voice. He was terrified too. The realization broke through the last of her panic. She wasn't alone in the dark. The tears came then. Not the frantic, panicked tears of the nightmare, but a deep, exhausting, soul-crushing grief for the 2 years she had lost. She buried her face in his neck and sobbed. Malfoy didn't flinch. He didn't pull away from the wetness on his shirt. He shifted his weight, pulling her completely onto his lap. He wrapped both arms around her, caging her securely against him, creating a physical barrier between her and the rest of the world. He buried his face in her messy curls. They stayed like that for a long time. The bedroom in the private suite was completely dark, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the single arched window. Hermione's tears eventually slowed to hiccups. Her breathing leveled out. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't the hostile, charged silence of the afternoon. It was soft. It was the exhausted aftermath of a storm. She didn't try to pull away. She knew she should. The logical part of her brain, the part that had demanded war reports and timelines, was screaming at her that this was Draco Malfoy. This was the boy who had mocked her teeth, mocked her blood, wished her dead. But the logical part of her brain was a very small, very quiet voice right now. The rest of her body was screaming something entirely different. Her body knew exactly how his arms felt. Her body knew the exact cadence of that cello melody. Her body knew that she was safer in this specific spot than anywhere else on Earth. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. His voice was a soft rumble against her hair. "No," Hermione whispered, her voice rough. "Neither am I." He didn't loosen his grip. If anything, he held her a fraction tighter. "It was the Great Hall," Hermione said, her words muffled against his shirt. She didn't know why she was telling him. She just knew she couldn't keep it inside. "I was running. And then Dolohov, there was a purple curse." Malfoy went completely rigid beneath her. The hand on her back stopped moving. "I don't remember it." Hermione continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But my body does. It felt like my magic was being ripped out. It was." Malfoy said. His voice was entirely devoid of emotion. A flat, dead sound. It was a dark curse designed to sever the magical core from the physical body. Hermione shivered. "He hit you," Malfoy continued, his words clipped, mechanical. "I was on the other side of the hall. I saw you fall. He stopped. He swallowed hard. "You what?" she prompted softly. I don't remember. He confessed. The absolute despair in his voice was devastating. I just know the terror. It's sitting right at the back of my throat. It's been there since I woke up in that hospital bed. When I close my eyes, I see you falling. But I don't know what happened next. He dropped his head against the wall, staring up at the dark ceiling. Knock came back this evening while you were asleep. He brought the rest of my things. I asked him how it happened. How the two of us ended up like this. Hermione's breath hitched. What did he say? He laughed, Malfoy said bitterly. He said it was the most agonizingly slow, painful thing he'd ever been forced to witness. He said we spent 6 months circling each other in safe houses, pretending we hated each other, before I finally snapped and kissed you in the middle of a war council. Hermione let out a small, wet laugh. A war council? Apparently. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. He said Potter was so horrified he knocked over a table of strategic maps. And Weasley tried to hex me, but you shielded me. I shielded you from Ron? She whispered. Yes, Malfoy said. He turned his head to look at her. Not said you were ruthless about it. He said from that day on, no one was allowed to question my loyalty. You backed me against the entire order. You risked your own reputation to make sure I wasn't locked in a ministry holding cell. He said you were terrifying. Hermione tried to picture it. She tried to picture herself standing between Draco Malfoy and her best friends, demanding they trust him. The memory was completely blank. But the instinct to defend him, right here, right now, was overwhelming. She realized with a sudden jolt that she would do it again, right now, without hesitation. If Kingsley burst through the door and demanded Malfoy's arrest, she would fight him off with her bare hands. It was a terrifying realization. The loyalty was absolute, even without the memories to anchor it. I don't have those memories, Hermione whispered, tracing a finger over the collar of his shirt. I want them. I want to remember what it felt like to choose you the first time. Neither do I. He said. Hermione lifted her head. She looked at him. The moonlight illuminated his face. The aristocratic, arrogant mask was completely gone. He looked young, broken, and incredibly vulnerable. She reached up. Her hand was shaking slightly, but she didn't stop. She pressed her palm against his cheek. Malfoy closed his eyes. He leaned into her touch instantly, a small, shuddering breath escaping his lips. I'm sorry. Hermione whispered. He opened his eyes. They were entirely silver in the dark. For what? For pulling away this afternoon. She kept her hand on his face. His skin was warm. I panicked. I was trying to make it make sense. I was trying to find the logical progression from the boy who hated me to the man who saved my life. And when I couldn't find it, I got scared. Malfoy covered her hand with his own. His fingers were long and elegant, his grip firm. I am terrified, Granger, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. I have absolutely no memory of why I defected. I have no memory of how we ended up on the same side. I have no memory of the war. He shifted, turning his head so his lips brushed against her palm. But I know, he continued, his voice rough, that when I woke up and you weren't in your bed, I couldn't breathe. I know that when the healer dropped that tray, my body moved before my brain could even register the sound. And I know that the only time this absolute, suffocating terror in my chest stops is when I am touching you." Hermione's heart stopped. "I don't need my memories to know that you are the most important thing in this world to me," Malfoy said. He looked directly into her eyes, stripped of every defense, every layer of sarcasm, every ounce of pride. "My magic screams it at me every time you are more than 10 feet away. My body knows it. And quite frankly, I am entirely too exhausted to fight it." Tears pricked Hermione's eyes again. She didn't try to logic her way out of it this time. She let go of the need to understand, sliding her hand from his cheek to wrap both arms securely around his neck, pulling him down. She buried her face in his shoulder, holding onto him with everything she had. Malfoy let out a long, shaky exhale. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest again. He buried his face in the crook of her neck. They didn't move. The silence in the room was absolute perfection. It wasn't charged. It wasn't heavy. It was simply the profound, quiet peace of coming home after a very long, very terrible war. Hermione closed her eyes. She didn't know the exact timeline of how they had fallen in love. She didn't know who had said it first. She didn't know where their first kiss had been. But as she felt the steady, calm rhythm of his heartbeat against her own, and the gentle, reverent way his hands traced the line of her spine, she realized it didn't matter. The memories were gone. But the love was still there. It was written into the marrow of their bones. It was carved into the magical scars on their skin. It was woven into the exact cadence of the cello melody he used to calm her down. "Draco," she murmured, her voice heavy with sleep. "I'm here," he whispered back instantly. "Don't leave the bed," she said. It wasn't a demand. It was a plea. "I'm not going anywhere, Hermione." It was the first time he had used her given name. The sound of it on his lips sent a wave of pure, golden warmth straight to her toes. It felt right. It felt completely, inherently right. She shifted her weight, sliding down slightly so her head rested perfectly over his heart. Malfoy adjusted his grip, pulling the thick woolen blanket over both of them. He pressed a long, tender kiss to the top of her hair. "Go to sleep," he murmured, his breath warm against her curls. Hermione didn't argue. For the first time since waking up in St. Mungo's, the darkness didn't feel suffocating. It felt like a blanket. She closed her eyes, surrounded by the scent of mint and the steady, protective hum of their combined magic, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning arrived softly, painted in the pale gold light of early autumn. Hermione woke up slowly. She was warm, deeply comfortable, and completely surrounded by the scent of mint and clean linen. She opened her eyes. She was still in the bed. Malfoy was still holding her. He was awake, lying on his back, looking up at the ceiling. His left arm was wrapped securely around her shoulders, keeping her tucked against his side. His right hand was resting on her waist, his thumb lazily tracing small circles against the cotton of her shirt. It was an incredibly domestic, intimate gesture. Hermione didn't move. She just watched the rise and fall of his chest, committing the steady rhythm to memory. Last night had shifted everything. The frantic need to find the missing memories had been completely eclipsed by the quiet, absolute certainty that they belonged exactly here. "You're watching me again, Granger," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. He didn't look down at her. "I'm not glaring this time," she pointed out softly. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Small mercies." He turned his head to look at her. The sharp, aristocratic angles of his face were softened by the morning light. His grey eyes were completely clear, completely focused on her. There was no hostility, no mask, just the quiet vulnerability he had offered her in the dark. He shifted, turning onto his side so they were face to face. He reached up, gently brushing a wild curl out of her eyes. Hermione leaned into his touch, closing her eyes for a second. The magic between their scars hummed a low, happy frequency. "Good morning," she whispered. "Good morning." He replied. The heavy wooden door to the suite clicked loudly. Hermione jumped. Malfoy's arm instantly tightened around her, his body shifting to block her from the door before his brain could even process the threat. It wasn't a threat. It was the head healer. The healer stopped dead in his tracks, gaping at the two of them tangled together in the hospital bed. He cleared his throat loudly, looking extremely uncomfortable. "My apologies," the healer said stiffly, looking down at his clipboard. "I knocked, but I suppose you didn't hear." Malfoy slowly relaxed his grip, though he didn't pull away entirely. The aristocratic mask slammed back into place so fast it gave Hermione whiplash. The soft, sleepy boy from 5 seconds ago vanished, replaced by the cold, haughty Malfoy air. "What do you want?" Malfoy snapped. The healer shifted his weight. "I came to run your morning diagnostics. If you wouldn't mind sitting up." Hermione scrambled backward, suddenly hyper-aware of her messy hair and the fact that she was effectively lying on top of a former Death Eater in a hospital bed. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, her cheeks burning. Malfoy sat up slowly, his expression carefully blank. The healer stepped forward. He waved his wand in a complex, circular motion over the space between them. A ribbon of pale blue light spiraled through the air, connecting Hermione's collarbone to Malfoy's wrist. The healer watched the light for a long moment before nodding in satisfaction. "Excellent," the healer said, making a check mark on his clipboard. "The resonance is completely stable. The blood magic has successfully integrated into your baseline magical signatures." "Meaning?" Malfoy asked coldly. "Meaning the quarantine is no longer necessary," the healer replied cheerfully. "You won't go into shock if you separate. You are both officially discharged. You can go home." The words hung in the air. "You can go home." Hermione looked at Malfoy, expecting to see relief. Instead, she saw the exact moment the drawbridge was pulled up. Malfoy's grey eyes went completely dead. He looked away from her, fixing his gaze on the far wall. The muscle in his jaw ticked once, twice. "I see," Malfoy said. His voice was ice. "I'll have the discharge papers brought up immediately," the healer said, entirely oblivious to the sudden, freezing temperature of the room. He turned and bustled out the door. The silence in the suite was deafening. The warm, golden light of the morning suddenly felt harsh and exposing. Malfoy didn't say a word. He stood up from the bed, walked over to the small table where Nott had left his belongings, and began to pack. His movements were sharp, precise, and completely closed off. "Draco?" Hermione asked softly, standing up. He flinched at the sound of his name. "Don't." Hermione stopped. "Don't what?" "Don't do that," he said, throwing a dark green jumper into a leather satchel. He didn't look at her. "Don't look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I'm someone you actually know," he snapped. He finally turned around. The grey eyes were furious, but it was a brittle, desperate kind of anger. "Because you don't. And neither do I." Hermione felt the air leave her lungs. Last night was a trauma response. Malfoy cut her off smoothly. It sounded rehearsed. It sounded exactly like the kind of calculated, cruel logic he used to deploy at Hogwarts to keep people away. "We were terrified. We were trapped in a room together, and the magic was forcing a physical proximity. That's all it was." "That is a lie," Hermione said, her voice rising. The betrayal stung, sharp and hot in her chest. "You told me you didn't need your memories to know how you felt. You told me." "I was having a panic attack, Granger," he said coldly. He turned his back to her and picked up the Daily Prophet that had been sitting on the table since yesterday. He threw it onto the bed, right at her feet. The headline screamed in bold black letters, "War Heroine Bewitched?" Granger found tethered to Malfoy heir. "Look at it," Malfoy demanded. Hermione scowled at the paper. "It's Reader Skeeter. It's garbage. It's reality." Malfoy corrected harshly. "That's the real world waiting outside that door. I am a marked Death Eater. My father is in Azkaban. I have a trial in front of the Wizengamot in 3 weeks. They are going to drag every horrible thing I ever did in 5th year, 6th year, and the war out into the light. Half the wizarding world wants me kissed by a Dementor, and the other half thinks I must have imperioused you into saving my life. I don't care what they think," Hermione yelled, stepping forward. "I will testify for you. Harry will testify for you. We know the truth. They don't want the truth." Malfoy roared back, his composure finally snapping. He threw the empty satchel onto the bed. "They want a villain. And I am the perfect villain, Granger. I have the mark on my arm to prove it. If you tie yourself to me out there, they will drag you down with me. The Ministry, the Prophet, the public, they will tear you apart for defending a Malfoy. Let them. No." He closed the distance between them, stopping just inches away from her. He was breathing hard, his eyes blazing. "You are the Golden Girl. You have the entire world at your feet. You won the bloody war. You are supposed to go out there, receive your Order of Merlin, and live a brilliant, unburdened life. You are supposed to be perfect. You don't have to carry me like an anchor around your neck anymore." Hermione studied him in silence, her heart shattering at the absolute conviction in his voice. The anger was just a shield. Beneath it, he was completely terrified. He wasn't terrified for himself. He was terrified for her. He was trying to protect her. He was trying to protect her reputation, her future, by removing himself from it. The absolute, self-sacrificing nobility of it was infuriating. "I chose you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "For 2 years, through a war, I chose you. I fought my own friends for you. I stood between you and the Order. I carved a blood magic rune into my chest because I would rather die than live in a world where you didn't. And now you have an out," he said. His voice dropped, losing the anger, leaving only a hollow, devastating resignation. "You have a clean slate, Hermione. The memories are gone." You aren't bound by the choices you made when we were desperate and dying. I don't want an out," she said fiercely. She reached for his hand. Malfoy stepped back. He actually pulled his hand away. The rejection hit her like a physical blow. "I'm giving it to you anyway," he said softly. He walked over to the bed, grabbed his satchel, and slung it over his shoulder. Hermione stood frozen in the center of the room. The panic was rising in her throat again, but this time, he wasn't going to pull her into his chest and hum a melody. He was the one causing it. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice small. "Home," Malfoy said. He didn't look back. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the heavy wooden door. "The manor is warded. I'm going to lock the gates, and I'm going to stay there until the Aurors come to escort me to the ministry for the trial. I'm staying out of the public eye. And I am staying away from you." He reached for the doorknob. "Draco," she pleaded. He stopped. His knuckles were white where he gripped the brass knob. His shoulders were tense, rising and falling with a shallow, ragged breath. "Don't follow me, Granger," he whispered. He turned the handle, pulled the door open, and walked out into the corridor. The heavy door swung shut behind him, clicking firmly into place. Hermione was alone in the room. The silence rushed back in, but it wasn't peaceful. It was agonizing. The silver scar on her collarbone flared with a sudden, sharp ache. It wasn't the agonizing, burning pain of the magic destabilizing. It was just a hollow, persistent throbbing. The physical manifestation of an empty space. He was gone. She stood in the middle of the room, staring at the closed door, realizing exactly how thoroughly she had lost him. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the gravel driveway of Malfoy Manor into a dark, muddy river. Hermione didn't cast an umbrella charm. She didn't cast a warming charm. She just stood in front of the towering, wrought iron gates, the cold autumn rain plastering her wild curls to her cheeks. The gates were supposedly locked. Harry had told her the manor's ancient wards were entirely sealed, designed to keep out Aurors, reporters, and anyone else who might come looking for the Malfoy heir. Hermione reached up and pressed her hand flat against the cold iron bars. She didn't know the counter-curse. She didn't have her wand anyway. The ministry was still processing it as evidence. She just pushed. The silver scar on her collarbone flared, a sudden, bright burst of heat against the freezing rain. The ancient magic woven into the iron gates recognized the blood magic humming beneath her skin. It recognized the signature of the wizard who commanded the estate. The gates swung open with a heavy, metallic groan. Hermione walked up the long, sweeping driveway. The manor loomed out of the darkness like a massive, sleeping beast. There were no lights on in the windows. It looked completely abandoned. She climbed the stone steps to the front entrance. She didn't bother looking for a knocker. She hammered her fist against the heavy oak wood, the sound echoing loudly over the roar of the rain. She waited. Nothing happened. "Draco!" she yelled, her voice tearing out of her throat. She hit the door again. "Draco, open the door." She knew he was in there. The pulse in her collarbone was practically vibrating, a steady, frantic pull that told her he was less than 50 feet away. "Open the door!" She shouted again, her fist connecting with the wood. "I know you can hear me. Open the bloody door. I will find a rock and break one of your ridiculously expensive windows." She stepped back, wiping the rain out of her eyes, and started scanning the gravel for a sufficiently large stone. The locks on the oak door clicked in rapid succession. The heavy door swung inward. Draco stood in the entryway. He looked terrible. He was wearing the same dark trousers and charcoal jumper he had worn at the hospital, but they looked entirely too big for him now. His hair was a mess, his face was pale, and the dark circles under his eyes looked like bruises in the dim light of the foyer. He gazed at her, standing on his front steps, completely soaked to the bone. "What are you doing here?" he rasped. His voice was completely wrecked, as if he hadn't spoken in days. "You left," Hermione said, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. "I told you not to follow me. And since when do I listen to you?" She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped forward, crossing into the manor. Malfoy fell back a step, clearly startled by her forward momentum. The moment she was completely inside, he slammed the heavy door shut, sealing out the storm. The sudden silence in the foyer was deafening. Water dripped from Hermione's clothes, pooling on the polished marble floor. Malfoy just looked at her. The cold, aristocratic mask he had worn at the hospital was completely gone. He just looked devastated. "You are going to catch pneumonia," he whispered. He didn't have his wand either. He took a step forward, stripping off the charcoal jumper in one fluid motion, leaving him in a thin white undershirt. He draped the warm, dry wool over her shivering shoulders. The scent of mint and old magic immediately enveloped her, chasing away the freezing chill of the rain. "I don't care," Hermione said. She reached up, gripping the lapels of the oversized jumper to keep it pulled tight against her chest. "You shouldn't be here, Hermione." "Stop telling me what I should and shouldn't do," she said fiercely. She took a step closer to him. "You don't get to make my choices for me, Draco. You don't get to decide what is best for my future." "I am a marked Death Eater," he said, his voice cracking on the words. He took a step back, putting distance between them. "I have a trial on Monday. The Prophet is already calling for a life sentence in Azkaban. If you tie yourself to me, they will drag you down into the mud with me. Then I'll get muddy." Hermione snapped. Malfoy flinched. He looked away, running a frustrated hand through his damp blonde hair. "You don't understand. You don't remember. Neither do you," she yelled. "Neither of us remembers. But I know what I was." He roared back, whipping his head around to look at her. The roar, desperate anger finally broke through. "I know I was a coward. I know I stood on the astronomy tower and let them corner Dumbledore. I know I watched them torture people in the drawing room of this very house. You don't remember the terrible things I did, and I am not going to let you ruin your brilliant, perfect life for a man you don't even know." "I do know you," Hermione said, her voice dropping to a fierce, steady whisper. She didn't hesitate. She closed the distance between them, ignoring his attempt to step back, and placed her hand flat against his chest, right over his heart. The frantic, rapid beat of it hammered against her palm. "I know," she said softly, "that when I woke up screaming, you didn't flinch. You didn't run. You held me until I could breathe again." Malfoy stopped trying to pull away. He stood perfectly still, his eyes locked onto hers, entirely trapped by her touch. "I know," she continued, moving her hand down his chest, "that when my hands were shaking so hard I couldn't hold a quill, You washed the ink off my fingers like I was the most precious thing in the world. She slid her hand further down, wrapping her fingers gently around his left wrist. She pushed the sleeve of his white undershirt up. The faded, ugly grey skull and snake of the dark mark sat on his forearm. Malfoy squeezed his eyes shut. He turned his head away, completely unable to look at it, completely unable to watch her look at it. The shame radiating off him was a physical, heavy thing. Hermione didn't pull back. She ran her thumb deliberately, firmly, over the faded grey ink of the mark. "And I know," she said, her voice unwavering, "that right above this terrible mistake." She moved her thumb half an inch higher, tracing the shimmering, raised silver line of the blood magic rune. "Is the proof that you would die for me." Malfoy let out a sharp, shuddering breath. It sounded exactly like a sob. He opened his eyes and looked down at her hand, holding his marked arm with complete, absolute acceptance. "I don't care about the profit," Hermione whispered, looking up into his devastated grey eyes. "I don't care about the Wizengamot. I don't care if it takes me the rest of my life to defend you to the entire wizarding world. I'm not leaving you." The last of his defenses crumbled. The noble, self-sacrificing wall he had built between them shattered into a million pieces on the marble floor. "I can't stay away from you," he confessed, his voice breaking completely. "I tried. Granger, I tried to stay away. But every second you were gone felt like I was suffocating. Then stop trying." She pleaded softly. He didn't need to be told twice. He dropped his arm, wrapping both of his hands around her waist, and pulled her flush against him. The physical impact of it knocked the breath out of her lungs. The magic between their scars flared, a brilliant, blinding rush of pure golden warmth that cascaded through her entire body, completely chasing away the last lingering chill of the storm outside. He leaned down. There was no hesitation this time. No panic. No fear of a stranger. His lips met hers, and it felt exactly like coming home. The kiss was entirely devastating. It wasn't tentative. It was a fierce, sweeping collision of two people who had spent the last 3 days trying to fight gravity. Hermione let out a small, breathless sound and threw her arms around his neck, tangling her fingers in his damp blonde hair. She pulled him closer, entirely desperate for the physical contact. Malfoy kissed her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. His hands were gripping her waist so tightly it almost hurt, his mouth moving against hers with a desperate, hungry reverence. Her body knew exactly what to do. Her body remembered the exact angle to tilt her head, the exact way to press against his chest. The muscle memory was flawless. They had done this 100 times before. He finally pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. They were both breathing hard, the silence in the grand foyer completely replaced by the frantic, echoing sound of their breathing. He kept his hands firmly on her waist, refusing to let an inch of space form between them. "We don't have the memories," he whispered, his eyes closed, his chest rising and falling against hers. "I know," Hermione said, her voice breathless. She didn't let go of his hair. She traced the line of his jaw with her thumb. "We don't know who said it first," he continued, a quiet desperation in his voice. "We don't know where this started. We are completely missing the foundation, Hermione." She smiled. It was a small, incredibly soft smile. "Then we'll just have to build a new one," she said. Malfoy opened his eyes. The silver in them was completely bright, completely clear. We have the rest of our lives to make new memories." Hermione whispered, looking up at him. "We can start right now." He studied her for a long, quiet moment. The absolute devotion in his eyes was staggering. "Right now," he agreed softly. He leaned down and kissed her again. It was slower this time. Tender and overwhelmingly sweet. The desperate edge was gone, replaced by the profound, quiet peace of absolute certainty. The rain continued to beat against the heavy oak doors of the manor, a violent, raging storm outside. But inside the foyer, entirely wrapped in each other's arms, they were perfectly safe. They didn't have their memories. They didn't have their past. But they had the morning after the war. And they had each other. It was more than enough. The end.